Time Magazine and Magazine The Report. He is also the co-host of the In Search of Black Power podcast. Please welcome. Right. And last but certainly not least, on our panel is Swana Jones. Swana Jones is an activist and the sister of Tyrone West, who was murdered by Baltimore City police officers in 2013. Her advocacy has attracted local and national attention in the fight against police violence. She has consistently held action to bring awareness to what happened to her brother through West Wednesdays, like I said before today. We celebrate 611 West Wednesday. All right. Awesome. So I'm going to start with you, Tawana, and then go around to everybody. The first question I have for you all is I want to start with you all telling me where you were when Freddie Gray died, or what's the first memory that comes to mind of that time for you in your personal life where you were?
So, we all were, we were like it was yesterday. I had just got in place with mom like a week prior, well, a couple of days before he was put out. And, literally just like had the hope that he was surviving. And when I found out that he passed away on the news, I was in tears, like I knew was home, was got home from work, watching the 6 o'clock news type of thing, and it almost knocked me off my feet that he passed away.
So the first memory that comes to mind is actually being at the top, and that was actually a hearing on police accountability at top. And I believe at that point he hadn't died yet, but he had been arrested. And there were people in the crowd, just, 2015, this is after Ferguson, after Trayvon Martin, and people in the crowd being like, "Look, these young kids are not going to get stuck." Like basically predicted an uprising, and I saw a photo of him on life. And at that moment, like even before he died, I knew this was going to be like a huge thing. Yeah, that was
it. My first thing was I was actually outside. I was outside Baltimore. I got off of Baltimore Street, and I just remember my phone pinging in the group chat, and that's when the video just had started to go viral online. But like my homeboy was sending it out in the group chat. So he was like standing outside watching the first video, and then remembering the second video popped up. So I was actually outside, and I just remember like it's about to happen. And I just wanted to be there outside. So there, I was the one dedicated like my Instagram and everything to that. I knew automatically before he even penetrated one of the just look up the spread of Baltimore. So I was like, my first memory is getting that video and do that.
For me, that was when I worked at City Paper.
I was freelancing, I was freelancing a lot for the airport at that time. So I started, my mind was going as far as like, what I could do, I could start kind of brainstorming to interview and talk about it. And that was around the time that I first interviewed too, for the airport.
This question is for you, Tawana. Being that today is the 611th West Wednesday, what are your thoughts on where the city is currently and where it was when you first started advocating for justice for your brother?
So where the city is right now, to me, is like, this discussion, the police talking is still happening. And it's happening every single day. This is really bad thing. And I'm just thinking about, back then, when my brother was still, the forefront grade was very everything, like something needs to be done. Like now, and it seems like our crimes are just going with enough ears, and that's what it's always been. And you see different change, but not really change, not a lot of killing out myself. Like I was rooting and praying and hoping that my brother case it would happen, but it didn't. So I'm still out there, still fighting. I'm still going to continue to fight. Even when Fred Davis was hurt, I'm like, yeah, they got that video because my brother couldn't protect the video. So I'm like, they got the video, you show us, we're going to get accountability. When I'm going to ask on the speech, we're going to get accountability. And I was so turned down, broken hearted, and everything else is appointed to the old day.
And so, I feel like today, what would you say, in all of this has been like your biggest lesson so far?
My biggest lesson is no justice, it's just us trying to hold folks accountable. And it's the same as always with just us, we, justice is fight all around the board, not because of your race, not because of anything, but we should all be accountable. But it don't happen when brown and black folks are hurt and executed. It don't even happen literally, and I'm not a bad one, but I just lost a form of freedom in a bad contract. And I guess you guys know you guys heard it, but so many and them, that was little cheap ass 9-year-old little girls that had a whole future hidden them, and it just plain what should have been a traffic stop. So again, our heart breaks down to that time my Russia was brutally executed from a traffic stop. Why is the traffic stop so we can brown, black folks, people murdered or beat down in the street? It makes them feel happy, and it breaks my heart.
Devin, you, so this resulted in like pretty large career launch for you. And I know one of the things that I appreciate that you said was, you picked up what you had from LSU and you knew something had to be done, you picked that up. What would you say in these 10 years up to now is the biggest lesson that you've learned through all of this?
I think that, for me, to make sure that all the doors are open, in the back of my mind, from the beginning, when I got that time card, I understood that my career is taking off, but Black man is dead. And I automatically knew that, looking at my predecessors, people like Gordon Clark, so the Robert Easton, some of these older people that was already pouring into me. The reason why I was able to maneuver Baltimore like that and do those things was protection from brother Congo to the nation of Islam, or the respect that I earned in the street culture, the older people looking out for me. I want to make sure that the power of photography and storytelling wouldn't just be in my own hand. So the first thing I did was go back and, pin or go down Curry Cumberland and start a youth program. My biggest lesson from there, I understood that I'm not meant to tell every story. I'm not equipped to tell every story, but what I can do, and what I believe one of my superpowers is instilling my storytelling, my knowledge and how I go about it into other people to tell those stories that I'm not fully equipped to. I find that sometimes with media, one of the things I hated about it, the reason why I turned to social media and turned to Twitter to get my voice out because I never controlled my own narrative. But due, unfortunately, that prophetic grade, I was able to get a time cover. And I became a point person on the ground for everybody. But I could point people in the right direction. So I think my biggest lesson is knowing that it's okay I'm not equipped to tell every single story, but it is my job to make sure that I use my platform, my knowledge, my reach, and my funds to equip the next generation to tell those stories. And the people that need to be uplifted, I'll uplift those stories also. This is great segue into your question because you talk about storytelling and controlling our narratives. When this when this happened, you ended up coming to City Paper Folds, which ends up being why you start to beat, and a lot of what we do have to do is, tell a narrative that mainstream media is telling. Can you talk about how important it is for journalism to reflect the community that is served?
Yeah, I mean, I think people live or die by narratives. Like I think everybody kind of, so many people in Baltimore, I talk to them and they instinctively understand that. Like, there's a reason why the president talked about Baltimore and Chicago and Detroit, because he's saying something very specific about Black people. Baltimore is a majority Black city. And one of the things that really powers me to be is knowing it's looking at all the other outlets that exist, a lot of the other outlets that exist. And even though this is a majority Black city, even though we have Morgan right here, Compton right here, University of Maryland, Howard down the hall, down the road, there's still not very many Black journalists at any of these outlets. And when they do have a strike force, they'll give us, like $250 for one story. And they'll think they're, doing a great job and leave it at that. And it's like, there needs to be more, there needs to be more attention, there needs to be more thoughtful, there needs to be more contact. So that's what I really try to do with the people.
I just want to stay there just for a second because you were talking the other day about a mainstream news outlet that sent surveys out asking about, what news people took in, and they left off all of the black papers in the state.
Yeah, so they were doing a survey, they were just asking the people who did the survey, where do you get your news? And everybody's on there, Fishbowl, WYPR, like the Sun, the Banner, all of them. But Beef's not on there, the Afro's not on there, All of My Times isn't on there, WEAA isn't on there. And I'm like, that says it always there. Even when you talk about like the narrative about the sun, whatever happened to the sun, number one, the sun has done horrific things, has written horrific things about black folks since its inception. Like really a lot of the major newspapers that exist in this country got their money in the beginning by selling ads for slaves. So we talk about the sun as this thing that's bad now. Like, no, the narrative has always been bad. Like it's worse now. But yeah, we talk about the sun, and then we don't talk about the Afro, which is over 130 years old. And I think that again, that tells you whose perspective is important, who people are thinking about as eyes on stories, who they're writing their stories to even. So you might even hire a black person. They might have one story, they can only tell a story a certain way, but their editor and everybody else is like, we're looking for the person with the money. Who like can say, okay, we can transfer this to ad dollars, we can transfer this to a subscriber. And they're still not thinking about writing to a black person's thoughts.
I wanted to open this up, whoever wanted to chime in on this. But we were talking the other day about how Baltimore shifted the narrative from it being riots to an uprising. And something was brought to my attention that I hadn't really noticed was that everywhere else that traditionally these uprisings had traditionally been called riots. And Baltimore was the first time that he kind of took that and turned it into, used the word uprising. Any of y'all want to talk to like why that happened or how you think that happened?
Yeah, I'll touch on that. So at the time, one of the things that I was doing was actually helping with social media and communications. So the original, we did obviously want to call it riots because, and one thing we haven't done a lot of level set is like what actually happened. So maybe we can leave a little bit of that into the conversation. So before Freddie Gray died, the Western District police station is right next to the public housing project, Gilmore, like it's right down the street. So there were these intense protests, uprisings of people who knew Freddie, who grew up with him, right at the police station. So within this context, like one of the things that we were calling it at the time was a Black Spring, Baltimore Black Spring, and that was like the hashtag because it was time for the era. Right, so this sort of transnational sort of uprising framework, 2015, era framework, like 2012, 2013, that was the context that we had envisioned as sort of like a global liberation framework, right? And so gradually uprising kind of gets more mainstream in part because of one person with a blue vest claims credit for it, right? So that's one piece of it. But I do think that the pressure of applying of the global liberation framework and the general concept of from the beginning, this is especially like poor working class blacks demanding after a really systemic pattern. Like this was obviously not the funny. This was Gilmore Homes. I lived a long time down the street, walk by on the way to the office. Like these are police operating like gangs with a culture of intimidation. And similarly, you have people rising up for saying that this one incident is indicative of a larger pattern of dehumanization and treating our community like we're not human as we're saying. So if you understand BPD, if you understand Baltimore as a slave city and a slave state that viciously denies that history, I think the uprising frame, especially given Martin O'Malley, this pattern of illegal arrests, that he was no longer in office, but it was the entire regime that he had implanted when he was mayor, then he was governor, and the impunity that was created because of the belief that we had to have this heavy-handed police practice to street ran as city safe for business, safe for capital, safe for gentrification. And these are the people who are the victims of that so-called progress. So they're saying that we're not going to stand for being washed away in the tide of progress that's going to be violent to our community. Right? So I think that uprising frame resonated because it was just so I'm laughing on it. It was so obvious that when people came from outside, they would say, man, this crime is really bad. Look at all the burnt down homes in Vegas. But all this was here before. None of this had anything to do with what you're calling right. All of this was the systemic structural violence of neoliberalism, of racial capitalism, of gentrification, of all these things. Again, you are calling progress. The police in the community in order to make it safe for investment, like Vietnam. You have to burn those down those things.
Also, just to touch on that, I think as a community, we control our narratives really, really well. We go back and look at a lot of the footage. Everything you heard came from the horse's mouth, was from the community, like you said. It was Freddie Gray, it was the Ricos, it was the homeboys that was leading a lot of that in the beginning. Before we would start parachuting in, I remember how small they got, and they got huge. And they went back still small, because we were still protesting in June and July. So I think if you look at just how everybody was just so involved, I think about, that morning after, I think about Stokey, I think about all the hair salon owners, the basketball coaches, I think about my homeboys, I think about the dope boys I know in the neighborhood, all that Drew Hill early in the morning, we gotta figure something out. And I think about the gangs getting together, I think about the Nation of Islam and the preachers hitting out, I just think about how we calmed that storm and how we worked as a unit, as a community. And those are the moments when I really understood what activism was, and everybody had a purpose. And it's like you said, the camera might have been mine, but something might have been like, oh, okay, I got a grocery store, I'm opening up my store anyway, and I'm gonna fry some hot dogs on the corner. I'm a faith believer, I'm a faith worker. I'm moving the spirit realm. I'm going to start doing, Tibetan singing bowls and dancing on the street. There was so many different things that were happening in prayer circles, and that's why when you say it's an uprising, right is just one aspect of that. It's one aspect. It's think about it like if you have a tool in your tool belt. We need prayer right now. Sometimes you gotta rise up. Sometimes you're gonna have those meetings. I remember going to council meetings and law workers and people that worked in that realm speak out. So you can have all these different components that are important for that change. That's what I think Baltimore did and how we showed up really, really well, where everybody had a piece and could add something to what was happening.
Can I say something?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I just want to say, as far as being in the community, I think too, like I think that both my brothers said was real good, but the main part was community being boots on the ground, controlling our narrative. And we would allow them to say, oh, it's a riot, and not G-check them, as my brothers would say in the street, when they would correct them. They would have kept that narrative. They were straight checking people at the door. Like you saw a small baby touching her brother and tell them, take that camera out, I'll take, get that camera out, I'll take, and we control the narrative. And I really believe it was us, boots on the ground, everybody in the community that was out there putting it up to one side, one cause, one free.
Real quick, I was asked to say this, but I forgot to say it in the intro, and I apologize. We've got cameras going right now with shoot the documentary for Baltimore Beach. And I'm sorry for not let you that. But yeah. I'm sorry. Oh, just about that, the changing of the narrative and that shift from it being called riots to being known now as the uprising.
I know for me, I got hired as city paper after that. And newspapers will have, or not news outlets will have style books sometimes. Like, it will always say, capitalize M for mayor or something like that. And it was like, yeah, we call it uprising. I'm like, okay. I also didn't even know they could do that. So it's always been how I call it. But I also think it's important to say that, like, power always adjusts to the narrative. Like, even though we got that win, it's like it's been interesting over the last 10 years watching how the narrative has been co-opted sometimes and changed sometimes. Like, I know when George Floyd happened, the big news outlets were calling, like, I mean, first it was Mayor Jeff Young, and then when he left it was Brandon. Staff, like having them come on and being like, it's a great, almost a success story, because there was no violence. And now we come to like, we had a story come out that actually wrote this year, wrote about the mayor's budget, and he increased the amount for police this year, and nobody said anything.
Wow.
And he's gonna be on some panels, I think, this weekend.
Okay. All right.
Lawrence, so leaders of a beautiful struggle, y'all are, and I think everybody up here represents a different, world of how to push back, how to bring about change. And you all are unique in the sense that you're a Black think tank, and you guys do a lot of policy work. And since 2015, you've been in quite a few very important battles. What was the first thing that y'all immediately got to work doing at that time?
It was, very interesting because a week before Freddie Gray was arrested, you know, as we just literally this week ended our 90-day session, and that was all of Maryland had the 90 days. So in 2015, when Freddie Gray was arrested, the legislative session had just ended. Because of the push from folks like the Delegate Jill Carter and advocates seeing what's happening in Ferguson, there was a big push for police reform in 2015 for those 90 days. And the goal was to change the law enforcement officers of the Black. This is a bill that gives law enforcement officers, when they're accused of internal disciplinary infractions, so not necessarily putting them on trial and putting them in jail. But my father being a police officer, I know one of the biggest things that actually deter police wrongdoing is threatening their paychecks, threatening their promotions, right? Because that's far more likely to happen than going to jail, not to jail. It should be a key part of the struggle, but you need that. If you know the union's gonna get you off, and you're not gonna get fired, and you're not gonna get disciplined, part of the culture of impunity we had here in Maryland is at a state level, because at the time the BPD was a state entity. That would be protection for police who are public employees, guarded by their union, that give them vastly more protections when they're accused of wrongdoing. So, like when the Freddie Gray incident happened, the mayor was saying, "I don't know what happened." And I don't think she was necessarily even lying, because they had a provision in their contract. The cops don't have to talk for 10 days when an incident like that happens. I actually watched the trial of the first person who went to trial. She said, "Man, I gave that statement. I didn't even remember what happened." They probably should have asked me sooner, but they can't by like law. If they had a 10-day waiting period, it's like really so that you can coach you on the story that can get you off.
Right. That's right.
And when you are accused of wrongdoing, like, you know, in this case, the chief is the boss and the cop is the worker. So when the boss disciplines the worker can appeal, and they basically have an appeals board called trial board. And until we were able to change it in 2021, that trial board was entirely consistent of other police officers from other jurisdictions. So when you had these cops doing repeated acts of wrongdoing, they could consistently get off, because other cops would say, "I don't want to," basically have another cop get fired, right? So as soon as the legislature had rejected all of the reforms in 2015, a week later, Freddie Gray was arrested. So we were like, it was one of those things where like we were really well situated. So, and this may be to conclude when things that happened a bit differently in Baltimore. In addition to the trial, like I said, we were at the trial, we called the have legal ramifications, criminal ramifications for what they've done. But part of the idea was to make the coverage and analysis of the criminal cases feed into a larger local policy agenda, feed into a larger state and local advocacy agenda to push for police reform, to try to prevent it from being entirely seen to run to trial or entirely these things going to the federal consent decree. And I think on both cases, we can pretty disappointed in terms of the outcome. And I think when it comes to state and local reform, that we haven't gotten everything we want, we've gotten much further. And I would say much further than other cities that had comparable incidents. Because we were really adamant in the beginning that state and local reform, policing is a state and local issue, right? At the end of the day, and that state and local law has the ability to create levels of public accountability and control of public safety that I think that we're still working on today.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that when we talk about policy, we talk about legislation, I think it's a very important part of the discussion. and I always point this out, and I know there's somebody probably in here from Rotary College, and I always point this part out, is that you talked about the mayor at the time, and at that time, that mayor had won a 13% voter turnout. So, and she won 7% of that. She won 7% of the registered voters in the city voted for her. And I think after this, we saw an increase in voter turnout. We saw an increase in political engagement, and even with some of the city council members that ended up running and things like that. Um, and not necessarily all ended up being good, but in any case, there was an increase in political activism. I want to ask everybody up here, and we'll start with you, Lisa. What are some small things outside of your individual worlds where you were working? What are some small things that you saw kind of happening that took off after this?
I feel like I saw, I think that having people like Devin, like Lee Watkins, Conwani, like, I think that they were writing about Baltimore in a really real and unashamed way. Like, I feel like before we talk around these nice ways of being racist and talk about the city. And like, of course, we're always like people writing about Baltimore in a way that we should, they experienced it, but they didn't get the same platform. And I feel like their work really made it so that even like right now you can go to Lexington Market and there's like a giant collage by Shannon Wallace or like that big poem that Conwani was like, that stuff would not have happened if there wasn't like this resurgence or resurgence, I don't know, first time push of like these people that were like, I'm from Baltimore, I talk like this, I write like this, I shoot pictures like this, and I'm proud of it.
Yeah, yeah, I can agree with that. I've seen a lot of people in my community just take accountability, where I felt like, unfortunately, that what happened to Freddie Gray, but he did like spark with some of us where we always thought life is what it is. You can't make no change. I'm too small. I can't do this. But I see my friends both start dog profits. You know, they hitting every school they can. Their mentorship has grown. I've just seen like ever since then, I've seen people not sitting and just complaining around the way, sitting on the few complaining. They really getting out. You know, going back to school, getting education, starting in nonprofits, starting those businesses. I think I've seen a lot of that, which I think has changed generation. Even when I was taking pictures back then, I was looked at as weird. Like, what you doing? You working for the police? Like, what you doing? You know, if you want to take pictures, I'll shoot dice. Like, wow, what? You know, like I think it's so much more that way. There's a whole new generation of photographers that are working, document what's going on in that life. I think what the beat has done, with of course like D, and I think about all these other amazing writers that's put the pen in the pad that are speaking for us. I feel like we have way more visibility than we did 10 years ago. I think there's a lot more opportunities. Like, hell, I didn't know what a grant was until 2015, so I got one. So, like, but I got friends that write grants now, so I've seen more of my friends just get more engaged, talk about vote, going out and vote, just being more active in the best ways they can. I just think ever since then, it's been a spark, and slowly sometimes it's moments, like Tawana said, you have those moments where you have like I could do anything. I see some change, then the city will smack you back down. But what I see is people just get right back up. It's like I'm right back into how whatever it is that I do.
So,
And I just feel like with Freddie Gray, the rest of the people, he was a lot of families, the wax and see the corruption, the corruption that we've been telling them exists. And sometimes people try to blind out to it, but when the nation is watching anyone trying to clean their mouths, it's like you expect a company that you want to clean them things to clean. So it's just like I've seen a lot of that. I've seen a lot of poverty tripping. I've seen a lot of people get paid off of Freddie Gray. They go to goddamn thing on the community.
yeah, I had just come off my first tour, and I got a lot of questions from outside of Baltimore. And one of them was, "What's the rough ride?" And I was like, like we've known what that was, since I was a teenager. But to find out that so many people were not aware of this, like, kind of regular life for us was wild.
Yeah, kind of on the last point. Um, so I have been told, and I've observed people say that Baltimore, compared to other cities, has a few reputations in terms of its response to its uprising. First, that it was more organized, and second, that it had more local control over as compared to national organizations coming in. But that was more what happened at first. But in Baltimore, the local organizations not only were willing to clash with some of the national organizations to take leadership over the work because our argument was so many people are already doing work. It's the opportunity to plug into those folks and expand that capacity. So I would say one thing that's happened with the Baltimore uprising, and again, compared to other uprisings, is that it was seen as tied to a more grassroots, Black community controlled response. And I think what's happened since then is that institutions that had been frozen out of the nonprofit industrial complex because they were Black controlled, because they may have been Black nationalists or had certain political leanings that were threatening to nonprofit establishment, they couldn't ignore them. I think one example, two examples briefly. One is the Black Church Food Security Network. So part of that comes from the cornerstones, many of them were hurt during the uprising, and people needed to get food. So part of what happened was, again, some national folks, but also a lot of folks, Dave on, other folks who might be in the crowd, but also Hebrew, were able to distribute food to these networks. That's part of an extension of Hebrew's work using growing food on church grounds as a Black sovereign community controlled food ecosystem. And they expanded greatly since then. But the last thing I want to say is, like when people saw the respect that people from like the Nation of Islam got in the community calming the violence, that made it so that some of the violence prevention work that they had already been doing in our community could not easily be ignored. So whatever you think of Pew, one thing she did was bring Doc Funley in was the Office of African American Male Engagement. So out of that spins We Are Us, which is a broad coalition of a lot of those folks are tied to grassroots community organizations that do violence prevention, including some of the mediation of stuff during the uprising. And since then, in part, I would say largely because of institutions like We Are Us getting funded for the first time, there were 350 murders, 2015. Last year, barely over 200. So the murder rate in the city has dropped almost a third, not just, I would say largely because of that. Largely because the people who you could no longer ignore, because of the credibility they had in the communities impacted by the uprising, forced an engagement with the nonprofit industrial complex to fund those institutions. And the last thing I would say is that because of that success, now the co-option is coming back. Now they're trying to basically take credit and bring these institutions into a public health frame, into a frame where they have to work with police, where other people can take that credit for the work that they have been doing before the uprising, but became even harder to ignore because of the credibility it shows.
Absolutely. Give it up for that. I like that you mentioned Eva Brown, who is one of many shining examples of like people who were already doing the work, because Eva was running the Freedom School out of this church, which if you don't know the Freedom School, I'm sure you know about Freedom School. He was doing the Freedom School and all that kind of work well before the uprising. I want to put this last question to everybody, and then I'm going to open it up for questions from the audience. What is so we talked about a lot of the progress. You've seen a lot of progress that Baltimore's made, a lot of things that have changed, and shifted, improved, grown. What is the thing that you want to see change now going forward? Like by the time we say it's 20, what would you like to see change? That's something you do.
I would like to see more support, like in the arts, for people that's actually from Baltimore. I think a lot of times being from Baltimore, you have a lot of big artists that either had to leave or just hang it up. There's so many artists that I started with that no longer do anymore because it was never no way to maneuver. But we didn't know about those ways to maneuver. So I would just love, more support for the local artists and the local people that choose to stay here. I think a lot of times the local voice can get drowned out, by the changing of the city, when you're looking at gentrification, disappearing neighborhoods, and some of these things, I always, when I bring this up, people are like, well, why don't y'all do something? It's like, that's easier said than done. But I would love to see, a Baltimore that can retain its artists, that's born and bred here, that understand the community. Like I've been, doing around, I get right into a lot of things, like what do the community need? And a lot of times people in the community can start talking, but they can quickly get told what they need. Like, you can't tell me what I need. I'm born and raised here. It might have worked where you was from, or you might have did a five-year stint here, but this is my home. I'm third generation. I know what I need. And slowly but surely those voices are not disappearing. You know what I mean? And I feel like a lot of Baltimore, we are good verbal storytellers. We sit outside and tell stories and talk about the pride our community, what side of Baltimore you from. I don't want to leave those stories for the next generation. You know what I mean? So I would love to see a Baltimore where they can retain some of the arts, retain some of that history, some of the people here that you want to be a part of that change in Baltimore.
I'm for sure 100% right.
I have some. Let me figure out two. I think, okay, so the first thing, I would love for us to just, the PR from politicians really bother me. Like, I don't want to see you on TikTok. I mean, doing the whatever. I would like, I feel like they play in our faces. Like, at one point, I just remember Towanda for you, they had you all in the press conferences, they had you all standing next to them and get pictures taken, and now they don't act like she's not here. And it's
I don't think there's an elected official here tonight, is there? Any elected officials in? I know they knew about it.
So I just want it to be harder for that. It's like, it seems like it's you announce Artscape, musicians, and everybody's happy about that. And it's like, about the baseline is the same. And I guess the other thing about my challenge for myself is always pushing out of my comfort zone and touching more people. Like we did, I think it was like 4 or 5 Fridays at Lexington Market. And I want to do more of that. I want to, there's so many people that are not in this room that should be. There's so many people that should be on the stage that are not. There's so many young people that I never thought I could be a journalist. I didn't know anybody was a journalist. So it's just pushing myself outward to get more people that we can hear their stories, and even thinking about storytelling in different ways, because not everybody likes to read, not everybody can read, playing with illustrations and audio and video are things that I would like to do to just get people more involved with what's happening in the city. Because there's so many people, when people talk about what my audience is, I'm like, there's so many people that have never even been counted as audience, any news outlet, that they don't care about.
Yes.
So real quick before I get started, I just wanted to say what each and every last one of you guys needed. For you to cover my brother's school exclusively, not changing my words around, just put the truth out in the good challenge. And I know the retaliation is real. So big shout out, Devin, for not selling us out. And you made it and just say, get that. For holding that camera, telling our story. Big shout out to you expressing in your music and just doing stuff like this, always do something when I'm wrong. Holding up the community. Shout out to you, everything you going in there, testifying, you passing, you put the whole church, you get the death threats, $20 from pastor. You like, oh my God, they come around being a hypocrite, all this stuff, and you testifying. So just wanted to share that with you and share with the West Coalition. I love y'all, my family, y'all, I hold it down. Words can't express, so I just want to get that out there. And I would really love to see is Killer Chops and Sunday.
Amen.
Killer Chops and Sunday. I'm tired of being a part of the club that I never signed up for. Literally going around the world. We people on a national level that didn't even know about my brother. Had it not been for me pushing, they wouldn't even know about my brother. And some still don't. And Sonya Massey did. Michael Brown. When they was in charge and had me up, I'm like, it's coming to Baltimore. I'm trying to say it's coming. I want to see the medical examiner's office. I want to see David Father in a cell block.
Yes.
Because he's locked up. I should not have went in my pocketbook, like how 50 grand when my brother's body said because you want to lie. And not just for my brother, but for anybody in custody, death, or any racist things that you want to hold the narrative to. He needs to be in a cell block. ASAP. I want to see all the politicians get out the bed with each other. I'm tired of it. That's what's stopping me and my family for getting accountability. They all in the bed now. The prosecutors, everything. The prosecutors in the bed with the people that killed my brother, and that's why we can't. I'm being honest. Y'all know I don't work for nobody but my goddamn stuff. I'm tired of being a teacher, and I'm gonna keep it real because I can leave my job there. Oh, God, bye bye. I love to say but bye bye. I'm gonna still speak my truth. You know, I turn down money because you're not gonna filter what my truth is. It's gonna always be the truth never change. So I just wanna see where everybody's been held accountable. I think we need to knock and smash this capitalist system down, so we're gonna shut it down. And let's do
Lawrence, I'm gonna tweak it just a little bit for you. Same question. What would you like to see, change? But also, if there's anything policy wise that we should all be looking about most urgent right now, that we can go on.
It's a lot of stuff. In terms of things that I want to see change, I think that we need to be able to engage the political process in a way that centers on giving community power. So, for example, like we have these imperfect vehicles, and when you have an imperfect vehicle, it doesn't feel good to study it and think about how to engage it and improve it. But if we want to have deterrent power over these cops, we have to figure out how we can best use the tools we have. So with the reforms we had in 2021, we had these police accountability board. And that was the goal, to have an entity that was not totally dominated by police. So you actually have civilians on the. Now what they don't have is independent investigatory power. So they still have to rely on internal affairs to get that information. We have bills in Annapolis clarifying because they have the power. But localities are trying to deny them the ability to give these boards subpoena power and hire independent investigators. And one of the people killing that bill is the leader of the Judiciary Committee in the House, Luke Clippinger, who himself in his day job is a prosecutor. So in terms of these prosecutors, again, Democratic Party, progressive, and maybe give you a little bit here or there. At the end of the day, they, like you said, they're all working together. Like he's literally a prosecutor, right? So I would say the last thing I would say, in addition to like that specific policy, is just looking at the future of Baltimore City, we have to get ready for things to change. There's no way around it. And if we don't control the change, it's just going to happen. It's going to make it harder for us to organize. Right? Like just for example, like Baltimore's close to being a non-majority black city. It's going to happen really soon. And part of what's happening is that the Latinx population is expanding. And we were very close to CASA during our fights for police reform and during the uprising. But there is this impulse to put the black community against the Latinx community. And part of that is strategic economic competition. So we aren't talking about black-brown coalitions around the shared violence we face from immigration policing. The Democratic Party had the ability to stop the deputizing of local police as ID. They chose not to do it just this week. And they have a very small reform that I think you can't go into churches and schools with. But you can still deputize them if you want to, right? And they're giving the churches and schools as their love of the immigrant community, but ignoring the fundamental question of the authority to deputize police. The last thing, $6 billion of construction is planned for this city over the next 6-7 years. 6 billion. They're redoing the stadiums, they're redoing the train stations, they're redoing the public housing. None of that's for us. I mean, working class black folks born and raised, right? So the level of gentrification that's coming, unless Trump successfully crashes the economy, there's nothing that's going to stop the level of gentrification coming from Baltimore that we've not really seen before. So we need to get serious about the land bank. We need to get serious about taking land off the speculative market. We need to be serious also if folks want to have homeownership, make it affordable. Because, you know, the idea of owning a home and not being on a voucher is understandable. We see Sean Cuddy every voucher. But the idea of wanting to own a home doesn't make you inherently bad. Being a landlord is not inherently bad. But we need to make sure folks are not slumlords, but work with people in the variety of spaces that we can actually build a unified.
Awesome, thank you. All right, so I kept my list for the panel short because one thing that I noticed happens a lot of time in discussion, we don't give the audience enough time to ask questions and engage. So I'm going to leave her up here, I'm going to leave the panelists up here, but I'm going to right now open it up to the audience, and I'll bring the mic around and just wave your hand.
My name is Bill. I'm one of the people that's active with West Wednesday, and I want to tell a little story about the rebellion. The Friday before the rebellion began, a group called Baltimore Block organized about 30 of us to go downtown and stop traffic. And it was really very impressive because almost every car we stopped waved and smiled and were with us on the anger against what happened to Freddie Gray, except one pickup truck with a Confederate flag on the antenna tried to run us over. So we got the Confederate flag off his antenna. Hell yeah! And the next day was the big rally just before the major rebellion. It was the start. And first, many of us were at Western District Police Station holding a rally. And during that rally, I held this up and explained what had happened. And someone came over with a cigarette lighter. We did our best to burn it. You could see it spark from the material didn't burn too easily. And then we went downtown, walked downtown from the Western District, and young people were outraged about what had happened. And some of the young people got on top of cop cars that were separated from the police in the midst of our rally, and they stomped on the top and it smashed out the windshields. And then after a while, one of the young people said, "Look, it's getting dark. We need to go back to the west side." So on the way, our cop cars' tires were slashed, some major businesses' windows were broken, and we got to the edge of downtown, the beginning of a housing area. And one of the young people said, "Look, we're not downtown anymore. Don't touch anything." And it impressed the hell out of me because the young people were outraged, they were courageous, and they were also very principled about what was targetable and what was not targetable. And we need to have a lot of respect for the young people that organized, participated in, and led that rebellion.
So Baltimore, for a long time, has been known as like a riot city, like a murder city. That's kind of like the narrative. And I understand how words can put like impressions of a city. How significant, or at least we can understand what happened here around the death of Freddie Gray as an uprising. But I wonder how much that has affected people who don't live in Baltimore, like how much that has affected their narrative. Because I see stories about Baltimore in other outlets, like in The Guardian, like US Edition, often features when they do US stories, like those stories about Baltimore seem to be like significant, as if whatever's going on in Baltimore is significant to the whole country. What is your perception of this being known as an uprising? Here is very moving, and people know that shift and everything that goes behind that shift. How much do people outside of Baltimore, do you think, have changed their perspective on Baltimore because of all the activism that happened in and around that?
I guess I'll take the point of that. Baltimore is a repository for many people of many of their worst assumptions and fears about Black. That was true before the uprising, and that's true after the uprising. So why does it become a hit series by accident? Because people don't know enough about Baltimore to see it as anything other than a projection in their own imagination. So I think part of what we need to continue to do is to lift up the positive things that happen in the city. For example, part of what happened in the Freddie community, for example, along the lines is because of these narratives of violence and decay, that's nothing there. Freddie community was actually supposed to be a success story for federal urban renewal. It was targeted with $100 million of Clinton money back in the early 90s. It called the Nehemiah Project and they called the Neighborhood Transformation Initiative. So what happened is that a small sliver of folks did get some homes, they moved out of the Penn North area, which basically left Penn North as a target for what they call drug nuisance abatement, which was basically hacking up the war on drugs. Again, all in the name of protecting the investment in the few homes that we built. So when we talk about doing reparations for war on drugs, part of it is we need to have things like reparations invest in those communities to change the narrative in a way that can't be attributed to a white figure, can't be attributed to a white politician, a white nonprofit, because it's going to be uplifting up not just any positive narrative. We have so many bouncy castles and youth programs, and those are great. Youth programs are great response. But what we need to do is have a framework like reparations be demanded upon and presented as the community having sovereignty in producing the change itself. If you haven't heard about the violence decline, it's because that's not an easy white statement to point to do. Right? And so last thing I'll say is that we just passed a bill that we have to say in Maryland study reparations in this state. And what we're hearing is that there's some push for West potentially not signing it because the fear is of anger Trump. And then Trump will cut the money, the federal money that goes to Maryland. And the idea that, again, the money that comes to the federal government that employs, the people in DC suburbs, that's what really makes the state run. But that will prevent you from even just signing a reparations bill, I think would be an example of people's narrative. The only thing that can save Baltimore is a big chunk of federal money falling to punish and saving the day. That's not going to work. We keep trying, we keep begging. And now it looks like we may even be running from social justice policies in order to keep that federal regulatory train coming. There's nothing you can do when you got a man like Trump, right? But because we don't have to believe in ourselves, because we internalize these negative narratives as a state of violence, as mob towns, as a place historically of even white ethnic violence. Because mob town wasn't about the Nazis. Mob town was about like the white ethnics fighting in the 19th century. We've always been a force. We've always had this narrative of violence, but we need to be able to change that narrative. Something like studying reparations, I think, will be a good step to telling you a full narrative of how Baltimore got this way and how to change.
I just wanted to say thanks because this is like one of the best panels I've been to. Normally panels are boring, but we got I've just been thinking that you all are sort of experts in combating like the most powerful people like on the planet, basically, and fighting and building different narratives and succeeding in doing that. And I know in some cases actually like being targeted personally and like, and surviving. And I feel like now we're kind of reliving that history where people are being targeted for their beliefs. The rights that we all thought we had are now, we're learning more about the history of those rights and how they were fought and won and how those rights maybe not really guaranteed. So I was wondering if you all could share some insight on the advice you have for everyone today on how to sort of persevere despite like the odds and when you're taking on those most powerful people.
I can answer that. I would say never sell your soul. Your soul is priceless. Keep speaking the truth. We just have so many like bootlicking people that just get down and just the master boots and not tell the truth. Like tell the truth, shame the devil. We have to sit when you tell like my brother Boone say, we all we got. We all we need. We gotta keep it pushing and we gotta keep controlling our narrative and we gotta keep saying their job about putting the truth out there, calling folks out. If they're not doing stuff, what's all right? You know, it's like a lot of politicians come around when it's time to vote. This way, we was voting time. This way we pay. This way we pay for a photo out. So many of them took out for me, and it's crazy. It's ridiculous. And I always give everybody a fair chance. You know, TV showing different, but if they say they use our things for their advantage.
I would say community. You know, that's what got me through everything that I've been through. You know, I met people, Shorty, I got Joe, you know, I met Kawan, and I had the block, I had, you know, the Nation of Islam, I had my homeboys around the way. So when it came to, you know, being protected, you know, making sure the police didn't touch me, you know, or learning about how to protest from the block, or, you know, learning from the leaders of the struggle who I watched lead protest over the years. You know, like the biggest thing is community. And that's something that Baltimore gets overlooked for so much. I have a beautiful community of people that I grew up with since a kid that still support me, that I still rock with me. I moved back to my old neighborhood. I'm living in my grandmother's house right now while I fix it up. And old head dudes come up to me and be like, "You ghetto son, right? You joking that shit." I'm like, "Yeah, I was like, man, I got you." You know, so my biggest thing is like in these times, you know, and the darkest of time, community can get you through a lot. So, you know, that's what got me through 2015 from police officers following me home, hitting me with shields. You know, when other people noticed it, they would wrap their arms around me. Oh yeah, that's when I learned what the buddy system was. Okay, dumbass, you don't go to protest and leave protest by yourself. I learned that, you know. I got my brother Benjamin, like, what I can say, going through those moments, I met some of the most beautiful people that became companions that I fought with. And when we talk about narrative or how we was able to control that narrative, me and Shorty and Tawana was going to Philadelphia talking about what we was going through. So we was tapping into other activists in other places. You know, like I've been able to tap into people, you know, as far as San Francisco. I think about the Monterosa sisters who their brother was killed in Vallejo. You know, and I reached out to them, it's like, you know, I know your brother hasn't been talked about a lot, but can you write me a letter about your brother for my book so I can uplift their voice? So it's like collaboration and community will take you a long way. So that's what, you know, through these moments, find your community, find your people you won't even think that will be there for you that will. Baltimore is one of those cities, so don't get it misconstrued through all the negativity. There's people here that you can meet that arrive with you to the wheels fall off, you know, and people like I can contest to Tawana, to Shorty. Shoot, Joe, we can go back to Joe. Joe's in all my damn pictures. We didn't know each other back then, but we was all on our pictures. And I remember getting the calls, oh my God, the photographer got beat up and go home. I was like, I'm in a house. I'm better to go back and get my home with Joe. You know what I mean? But, you know, Joe, you know, moments where me and Joe have been in Gilmore Homes together when Bernie Sanders popped up. And Joe was like, hey, we got to get down there. You know, because we have the respect of the community. Joe, you know, has done some amazing things in my community for photography. We built that camaraderie all the time. So in those moments, take your hands to community, wrap your arms around each other, and build those connections. Don't just pop at one protest, get your little photo out. Don't come out there with the best sign that you can get. Because we seen that in 2020. I just want to have the best sign I can get. You know, and you get your photo out, know really go. Know who's organizing. Know who's the one that's going to get your ass out of jail. Know who's going to be there waiting for you. Know these people that do that work. That's your community and that's your people. So I urge everyone in these moments where protests are going to be coming and you know where the state of the world is, make sure you know your organizers, know your lawyers, know the people and boots on the ground, because those are going to be the people that save your life. And that's what I was saying.
Mine is also community because like to be this small news outlet, we don't have a ton of money. Why they would use media design the cover. Devin, we ran these pictures for free. Like the poem on the back, we get that for free. Like there's all the beat doesn't happen without interaction with a lot of other organizations because you know when I look at people in traditional journalism, when we do get money, that's great, but we don't get the kind of money that other places. They're looking at me like I'm crazy. It's not normal journalism. So it's really been netting ourselves in with other people doing like-minded work in Baltimore City. Also, for me personally, like I thought about what you said, you was talking about the politicians kind of selling us out because they don't have that like internal self-esteem. Like when we walk, I'm sorry. But like we walk out the door and we're told that we're terrible, that we're awful. There are these narratives about that if you're black, you face about your parents, about what you do, about your intelligence. I am bombarded by that, and it gets to me. And it's like I have to sometimes go to my roots and remember what I'm doing. I have to kind of recenter myself a lot because the world is telling me that I'm stupid. The world is telling me that I'm bad. The world is telling me that this is not the work that I should be doing. And it takes, again, community, friends, family members, their voices, but also me having to get real quiet and remember myself because it's easy to not.
I'm gonna say I appreciate what y'all doing. I was born in 1959. Emmett Till is your Freddie Gray. I've been watching y'all kill black people all my life. I came straight out of the Illinois Department of Correction in 1991. All right, and I'm an activist in Baltimore. All right. To dismantle the master science, we got to use the master's tools. We tore down the statues, but we didn't tear down the institutions of slavery. You know what I'm saying? They repealed Roe versus Wade, but they ain't said nothing about Dred Scott, and we wonder why they treated the way they treated, because they ain't never said the woods would work anything. So you want to fight this fight? Racism don't work without black cooperation, but it ain't gonna end without white participation. That's why we need to build these relationships and partnerships with these oppressed people. Oppressed people help oppressed people. But white people have a luxury. You know what I'm saying? And we got to use that luxury. We play Monopoly, and we at the bottom of the board. You know what part of the board we in. Feel me? So if we're gonna make that change, we all gotta be that change. I ain't gonna ask nobody to fight my fight. I told you to watch me fight. I encourage other people to teach people how to fight. You feel me? Love me or hate me, all of my respect. I ain't never did nothing to hurt y'all. I ain't did nothing to lift y'all. You feel me? So in 2025, start putting in that work, man. Don't just talk about it, be about it. You might not be able to mark, but you know how to write a letter. You know how to write an email. You know how to stand your ground. Educate yourselves. I got a GED. I quit school at 16. You feel me? I'm a functional illiterate. I can't read very well, but I can understand a lot. You feel me? So what I'm saying. So what I'm telling y'all, and I said telling y'all, because I'm older than most of y'all. I'm gonna treat you like my kids. I'm not your friend, I'm your father, and your family member, I'm your Uncle Shorty. And I ain't gonna never tell you wrong. And if you see me doing wrong, check me. And as long as you've been here in Baltimore, who checked Short?
So one of the things that's to reinforce that people talked about still, was the uprising started before Freddie Gray died. The first response to the police station was close it down, and the cause of the half batteries around it was the family in the neighborhood that Freddie grew up in. They were going down to the police, and they almost went into the building, and it was a family member who said, "No, that's what we don't need. We're making our point." And they can make a change. And it sort of happened. And a lot of things that people mentioned really have stemmed from that. A lot of people mentioned the organizations really came out of that 10 years ago. But again, remembering it's not just every Wednesday when people have lost family members and for these things, it's every single day. And so it's not just on the anniversary, it's a correspondence with some of the family members really have heard it. The other thing I want to point out is that there was a really terrible thing that happened that there's probably nobody in the room that's not a family member here knows about. And that was, there was a GoFundMe paid for Freddie's funeral that raised a whole bunch of money that got stolen. The Thursday it was due, family tried to collect it and it had disappeared. So again, there are always people that try to take opportunistically to do these things. And luckily there were some people that found out about it early and stepped in and paid for the funeral.
immediately. But again, I think again, it comes back to the people and their suffering as Shorty said, there's structural issues, things that really need to be overcome. And I think part of the positive thing about Baltimore is these things came out of individuals and communities, but they continue. And they are continuing and they're actually expanding now. And it's a lot greater now and more positive now than it was in the past. It's not done now. I'm gonna try to work my way over to this side of the room. If you're on this side of the room, I'm gonna try to work my way back over here.
Hi, I'm Ray. I'm a local organizer with an organization called Tempest. This is really awesome. Something that really struck me about the discussion was that positive change has come out of, was that kind of the Baltimore uprising was like a spark and a lot of new people new to activism and organizing, and it allowed them to continue to stay involved because they were so passionate about what had happened and what change could mean for their lives. And it really strikes me that things are still happening. Fascism is rising globally. Black and brown people are still being killed. There's still brutal police all around the world. People in Palestine are being brutally mangled. And the message that I feel like is here on the table for all of us today is that if we care about these things and if we want to see our world change, that we don't have to just go out and find the organizers. We need to take charge ourselves and make the choice to be organizers ourselves. That we need to go out and find organizations to be involved in that fall grew out of BALT, B-A-L-T, grew out of this Baltimore uprising and has been an incredible help to activism since then. There's a potential to continue growing these organizations, to continue growing ourselves and our own strength as organizers. So yeah, there are like community meetings, in Baltimore. So if we really want to get to know our communities, let's go to these community meetings and learn what our neighbors need, and really try to address those needs and really try to be those organizers to stay involved in our communities. We're serious about this change.
And on that note, also, we have the community and government calendar. And so there's always, West Wednesday is always on there. And if anybody ever has any other events that you want us to put on the calendar, we'll do it. It's in charge or anything.
Lots of great hats in the room for everybody working. That's one of the main. My name's Candy. I think the question that I have will come after a lot of words. Okay. So I think that my experience with a lot of situations where the city has been in turmoil on like a national stage is that I'm pretty tired as a human being and I'm asleep. And Freddie Gray being murdered woke me up in a very I had like a racial awakening from that experience. Young black, I was white, it was a whole thing. But there were two things that happened. One thing was that I was one of the people with the signs, the march, and, I have to do the sign or whatever. And we were in Stantown, and there was a black man screaming at all of us about how we're never there and how we are capitalizing on the pain of the city. And where are we whenever we're really needed? Or where are we whenever we're really needed? Where are we whenever, things really go wrong? And then I watched white people try to quiet him, and there was something that felt bad about that. And then the next thing I remember is being in a circle full of, I don't know. It was just in the middle of the square, and there was music, and there were drums, and people were crying.
and people were dancing and people were laughing and, both of those were, some of the most powerful experiences that I had. And so I think that my question for you, anybody, all of you, is what how do you, I don't know, how do you live in between those two kinds of experiences, I guess? How do you live between these like earth shattering experiences and still find joy, um, at the same time? Yes.
I can start off with me, it's just love, like love heals everything. And I always say, this to love to live, and I mean that from the bottom of my heart. And it's the love that I have is for my brothers, and not just for my brothers, it's extended to everybody in my community and around the world. Love heals all, so just remember that love heals all, and that's when we around the place of darkness. Like I literally, I'm ready to go outside here, my day off playing, they show I'm ready. And then all of a sudden, I go on Facebook and I see my former people, they're talking about Russian people. And I'm like, wow, and I get shocked. I'm a big crybaby. I broke down, didn't go nowhere and cry like literally all into money, like nonstop. Like I was ready to go to the hospital so bad. But then once I thought about it, I'm like, you know what? I just started thinking of the lovely moments that I had with you. I loved her. I love the level, we love the more accountability, and just trying to be there for the family. What can I do? I was my position when I'm living there. What can I do? I love to help this family. Sometimes love will get you in trouble too. People take advantage of that. And just always love the love, this love for me.
Once again, we'll go back to community, like, for us, and I think I can speak for like so long that a lot of us are saying, we've been doing anniversaries for a minute. We did like a 3-year anniversary, we did a 5-year anniversary, we did a multiple things. And like in the beginning, for me, I didn't realize the work that I was doing. I didn't know how much it weighed on me too. It was like way later down the line. All the protests stopped, everything slowed up. And now I gotta sit with all this energy, all these emotions, everything that we went through. And oddly enough, 3 years later, I went through suicide thoughts and all types of things, and like didn't even want to be here at one point, to the point that my mom had to call the police on me to get the ambulance to come, went through the whole spill just to find out 3 years later, I do a 3-year later anniversary at this place called Institute of Integrative Health. But I'm sitting with Adam from a beautiful struggle, Raleigh for Be More Block, and Erica Bridgeford from the Baltimore Ceasefire by Peace Moment. And we all was going through it at the same time, but we was all going through it in these silos alone, not knowing that we all had marched together, we all had been on the front lines together. And Adam was leading the march, and I was at that one document, or I would see her, who was my kindergarten teacher, that I was small Baltimore is, she's burning sage on the corner. I would see Raleigh, telling me, you too close, and I interact with all these people and then don't realize 3 years later, I'm just trying to do an anniversary event to come and talk about, we're sitting here and I'm telling you where I was at mentally. They said, oh, me too. We went through those silos, and that was an awakening moment for me to be okay to speak out about these moments, that it's okay to go through them. And anybody, I don't know if you ever heard the song Vivian Green, Emotional Roller Coaster, but that's what the uprising was for me. Like I was high at the moment, I felt like change was happening, then I'll hit an extreme low and be down bad. But once I was able to speak about it bravely and openly and be open, that's when I stopped suffering in silence by myself. And that goes back to community, really tapping into people that have been there and seen some of the things that you've seen. And being from Baltimore, I'm a tough cookie. I've lost a lot of friends to gun violence. I've seen some things, but going through being tear gas, pepper spray, followed home, or watching people get snatched up, not knowing if they're gonna be released because they holding people, being there in the morning, they snatching people up, and you need to be off the street by 10 o'clock at night, and you want to be there for everything. That's a different type of fear and mentality energy that you're digesting. You gotta go home and sit with that. But, and you touched on that, the reason why that guy was yelling, because he was frustrated, because you're dealing with people that deal with food deserts, you're dealing with people that deal with pharmacy deserts, you're dealing with people that schools are shut down. These kids had to eat for some days because the school shut down. You got police running around on public transportation using our buses. You know, so there's a lot of frustration there because people do parachute in and want to tell our stories and want to be there, but the moment we really need you, when the protest stops us, when we really need that shoulder, and we really need those talks, and we really need those hugs, and we need that love that Tawana was talking about. So in those moments, when you had those lows, once again, lean on your community. And if you don't have that, it's here, it's already built. Just need to tap into it.
I just want to say thank you for Carol. I was high school today and I was tracking the uprising on Twitter, so this is great content. Also, I work with the music on the board. This was like the content that Sunday, what I was saying, what to attend, what I was saying. It's 6 p.m. And the board also has some openings and has to get involved. I would like this, if you want to come talk to me, share more information.
Thank you so much. So I just got the red light from Colin, because the staff has to get out of here, hard stop it now. So I apologize for anyone else that had questions, but we do have time to stick around, if you want to have further discussion with the panel members. But I just wanted to first say thank you to Red Lemon Streets and Neighborhoods. I also want you all to make some noise for yourselves. I didn't realize until I pointed it out earlier that, you know, there were no elected officials here. I think that I'm not in office, but if I were, I would want to be in this room. But it's indicative of where we are, where we need to move going forward. So thank you, each and every one of y'all that showed up tonight. Make some noise for yourselves. Last but not in the speech, make some noise for our panel. Thank y'all for all the work that you do, that you continue to do. I hope that you stay encouraged and stay supported. Last thing I want to say, Baltimore Beat, again, we have the branding issue that's on. There's some extra copies right here on the table. We are a nonprofit newspaper, so if you can, please donate, support the Beat. Look out for this issue. I want to shout out Logan Hollinger, who's right here, who wrote an awesome piece with Judge Lenore about both. Baynard Woods is in here. Baynard Woods has an amazing story in there, just documenting that time interview. It's a great issue. I encourage everybody to pick up a copy. For other events, we'll be posting them on the Baltimore Beat pages. Also, starting soon, we will be having talks. So when we put out issues, if you ever want to meet any of our writers, we'll be having talks right before Garden House, current space during this season, spring, summer, fall. And then lastly, May 17th, Baltimore Beat, in collaboration with Peabody Heights, will be launching a beer. And sales from that beer will go to Baltimore Beat, go to support Baltimore Beat. So we're going to have a fun, Friday night Baltimore music as well.
Also, we'll have a show next week at the Baltimore Museum of Art. Some of Devin's images are in this issue, but there's a lot more. Yes.
All right.
And so we work together on that, and it'll be, I think it's what, April 17th? April 16th.
Yeah, so the photo story in here, pictures of Devin this event at DMA, also unreleased pictures that Devin has, or rarely seen. Rarely seen pictures. He just showed some of them.
10 seconds, follow us at LBFBallpark.com. We're gonna be doing an email blast, getting people to contact the governor, asking him to sign the reparations bill. So again, at LBFBallpark.com.
Lots of good stuff going on.